These are 7 real stories from people who came closer to danger than they ever realized. Some of them found out years later. One of them still does not know if it is truly over. This is what happened. Story 1. Stranger followed us and hid behind a tree during camping trip. In July 2025, myself and my group of friends went on a camping trip together at Bear Brook State Park in Allentown, New Hampshire. In total, there were 7 of us. Myself and my friends Joe, Danny, Mitch, Nate, and Mac, all aged 18 to 20, and Mac's dad, Ben, in his mid-50s. It was the last night of our trip, around 12:15 in the morning. I was half asleep in my tent, while Mac and Ben were at the campsite, waiting for my other friends to come back from the bathroom. The bathroom was just across the road from our site, visible from all our tents, and took about 30 to 45 seconds to walk to. My friends Joe, Danny, Mitch, and Nate were in the bathroom brushing their teeth, getting ready for bed. Apparently my friend Nate unplugged my friend Danny's phone, and Danny was kind of jokingly yelling at him. Nothing too loud, but definitely some name-calling and yelling. Suddenly, a man who looked to be in his mid to late 30s or 40s walked into the bathroom. My friend Mitch was kind of in the way, so when he noticed, he moved aside and said sorry. The guy said nothing. He went to the urinal, flushed, washed his hands, and walked out, saying nothing. My friend said he had a kind of 1,000-yard stare in his eyes. The bathroom had a row of windows at the very top of the walls that were too high up to look through, but open enough to hear sounds from outside. After the man left, from those windows, my friends heard footsteps pacing back and forth on the gravel outside. They stopped dead and just listened. Then the same man came back into the bathroom and returned to the same urinal, like he was pretending to use it, but was not actually doing so. At that, my friends decided to get out of there and go back to the campsite. As they were walking out, they thought they heard something behind them. They got to the campsite and quickly told Mac and Ben what had happened. That is when they turned around and shined their flashlights back toward the bathroom, and Nate said, "Look, there he is, behind that tree." To their horror, they saw the same man from the bathroom had followed them back to the campsite. The flashlights caught half of his body still sticking out from behind the tree. When he noticed the lights on him, he seemed to try to walk away and play it off, but then he stopped and said, "Put the light down, little boy, and go to bed." Ben, Mac's dad, said, "Stop following my boys." The man replied that he had just been going for a walk when he heard them being loud in the bathroom. Ben called it out for what he believed it was, a lie. The man turned around and walked off completely into the dark without turning on a flashlight or anything at all. The whole time I was in my tent, I only heard the conversation once my friends shined their lights at him. But the one thing I experienced that nobody else really did was that my gut told me he had not walked back on the road to other campsites. It felt like he had cut across the open field next to us, a field that leads only to a pond. We called the ranger. Nobody picked up. Then we called the police and waited. An officer arrived and told us that this kind of thing is not as uncommon as you might expect. He said there are times when people come by, get into campsites, and take supplies. They searched the area but found nothing. We ended up packing everything and leaving that night. The next day we called the campground and gave a full description of the man. They told us that to their knowledge, no registered camper matched that description. To this day, we have no idea who that man was or what his intentions were. If that gave you chills, the next story starts on the other side of the world, and it tapes a very different kind of wrong to make your skin crawl. Story 2. I am not sure if I should block him. Please give some insights. I am a 30-year-old woman and I was traveling alone in Stockholm. I thought it would be a safe place. Northern Europeans tend to be introverted, so I did not expect strangers to approach me. I was on a bridge taking a picture of the city on the day of my arrival, when a 65 to 70-year-old male local cyclist stopped and offered to take a photo of me using my phone so that, according to him, my photos would not be just sceneries. I thought it was nice of him and agreed. After the photo, we chatted briefly about culture, then parted ways. When I was walking toward the old town, the cyclist caught up with me again on the bike lane running alongside the footpath. He asked if we could have a coffee sometime. I said maybe later, and left him my phone number. A few days later he asked again, so we had dinner together. It was normal, and nothing else happened. On my last day in Stockholm, I asked him for recommendations for a local jewelry store. He recommended a handmade jewelry workshop, and I went there after dinner. When I left the store, he was standing outside. I thought it was a coincidence, since he lived in the city center. He picked up a mug from a nearby shop as a goodbye gift, and asked me for coffee again. I declined, because I had an early flight. After I left Stockholm, he messaged me nearly every day. He mentioned wanting to travel to my city, which is about 20 hours by plane from Sweden. At first, it felt like having a pen pal. We talked about culture and food. Then it started getting strange. I jokingly asked why he had approached me, since Swedes are generally introverted with strangers. He said he thought I was cute. I thanked him, but felt uneasy. When we talked about ice skating in Northern Europe, he said I should visit in winter so we could skate together. I told him I cannot skate, because I grew up somewhere where it never snows. He said, "It is okay. If you fall, you will fall into my arms." He told me his mother had passed away, and that he missed her deeply. I said kind words and he replied, "My mother would have liked you very much." Later, when I mentioned I appreciated how Swedish hotels provide separate duvets for each person, he agreed and then asked me, "Do you sleep naked or with pajamas?" Then, when I told him a bakery he recommended no longer had the seasonal dessert he suggested, he replied, "Oh why, have you been naughty?" After that message, I barely replied anymore. He knows my full name. If he searches for me, he can find where I work, and I live 20 hours away. I still do not know if I should block him or explain why, or if explaining would make things worse. That story is a reminder that danger does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, and very far from where you thought you were safe. The next one is louder. Story 3. Never accept rides from strangers. This happened in 2020, at the height of the pandemic, during lockdown. I am a guy from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. My boss invited a few of us to spend some days at his place in the countryside. Fishing, hunting, just relaxing. I was tired of being stuck inside and said yes immediately. The trip was about 180 kilometers to a small mountain town with fewer than 15,000 people. The problem was that I took a motorcycle that had been sitting unused for 3 months. About 20 kilometers before arriving, the bike started losing power and even shut off once while I was shifting gears. I found a repair shop, probably the only one in town, but the mechanic said he could only look at it the next day due to early pandemic closing hours. Every time I tried to leave, the bike died. I offered him extra money. He refused. I tried calling my boss. His phone was off. I called coworkers. They had not even left home yet. There were no taxis. Ride apps did not operate there. I had 2 options: wait or walk 2 hours. I chose to walk. A man at the shop overheard me and said he was heading in the same direction and could drop me off. He looked normal, maybe around 40, driving a pickup truck. I accepted. As soon as he got in the car, he pulled a gun from his waistband and placed it under his thigh. I grew up in the countryside. My father used to carry the same way. I did not think much of it. The man was very talkative. He started asking where I was coming from, what I did for a living, whose house I was going to, whether someone was expecting me or if I was just showing up unannounced. He talked about how much he loved driving for hours, just for the pleasure of it, that he was just passing through. When I mentioned I had recently been to a strip club, his eyes lit up. He told me he had traveled all over the country and described the women he had encountered in different regions. Then he said something that immediately set off alarm bells. He said women from the Northeast were not even worth raping. He kept going, describing how he would approach women and leave without paying for services. I asked if he had ever had trouble for that. He said no, because he never stayed more than 1 night in the same city, and he said that nobody would care if one of them disappeared. He spoke so casually, it almost sounded normal. I was so absorbed listening that I lost track of time. When I checked, 40 minutes had passed. The destination was less than 20 kilometers away. Where was he taking me? I had no signal. Maps would not load. I said, "Hey, I think we already passed it. You can drop me off here." He said calmly, "Why are you so nervous? Relax. Nothing is going to happen to you. I'm not gay." I told him he was misunderstanding me, that I just thought we had passed the turn. He said it did not really matter, and then suddenly accelerated, turning onto dirt roads. I yelled, "Let me out here." He slammed the brakes in the middle of nowhere, and in a very aggressive tone said, "Get out of my car, you hysterical little thing." I got out. As I walked away, the car just sat there, facing me, watching. I walked for about 3 hours until I got cell service. My boss came to pick me up. I still think about what would have happened if I had been a woman, or if I had been traveling with one. I learned my lesson. I will never accept a ride from a stranger again. 3 stories in, each one darker than the last. The next one takes place in the ruins of a country still finding its footing after war. And what happened there was something nobody planned for. Story 4. We explored a library abandoned for 20+ years, until we turned around. I visited Syria for the first time in my life in February last year, just 2 months after the fall of the previous regime. That day I was walking with a friend along the shore of a lake when we came across a building. It looked abandoned, large, elegant, slightly elevated above the surrounding land. The road around the lake ended right at it. The front gate was locked with heavy chains and a sign read, "No entry." My friend told me it had been abandoned since 2002. Curiosity got the better of us. The lake's water level was low, which made it easy to walk alongside the building. The wall facing the water was low enough to climb. We got inside. At first it felt peaceful. The courtyard overlooked the lake on one side and vast fields and orchards on the other. It was quiet. Too quiet. We got distracted by the view and stopped paying attention to everything else. That is when they appeared. No footsteps, no warning, just suddenly, soldiers standing behind us. I froze and raised my hands even though they had not asked me to do anything. My phone was still recording video in my hand. One of them stepped forward. He seemed to be in charge. He greeted us politely, introduced himself, and apologized if they had frightened us. Then he asked me to delete the video. He explained that we were not supposed to be there. The library had been shut down years ago during the previous regime. After its fall, the area had been turned into a restricted military zone due to its strategic location. During the war, the building had been looted and vandalized multiple times. He told us that being there could have legal consequences. We explained we had been living abroad since 2011 and genuinely had no idea. He studied us for a moment. Then he said he believed we meant no harm. He personally escorted us out and told us to be more careful. We agreed, probably a little too quickly. Sometimes the danger is not what you expect it to be. The next story is quieter, and in some ways, that makes it worse, because it never fully ended. Story 5. I was being stalked. Maybe still I am being stalked. There was a time in my life when I was being watched, not in a dramatic or obvious way, quietly, repeatedly, enough to make me question my own reality. It started when I was around 14 or 15, back in 2016 and 2017. There was a guy from my coaching class. We were in the same room, the same space, but never really interacted. No conversations, no eye contact, nothing. At first I used to see him around my house sometimes, just passing by, roaming nearby. I assumed he probably lived in the same area. Until one day a classmate who happened to be his friend told me, "He likes you, he comes to your area just to see you." That sentence did not feel flattering. It felt wrong. Because suddenly things stopped feeling coincidental. The bigger question hit me: how does he even know where I live? And then it clicked. His best friend traveled in the same van as me, from classes to home. That was how he found out. That realization shook me more than anything else, because it meant my personal space was no longer private. And it did not stop there. Other classmates told me he had done similar things with other girls, that he was that kind of guy. Then one day things escalated. My family had come to pick me up from class because we were heading out of town. I got into the car, and then I noticed him. He was following our car, not for a minute or two, for a long stretch, around 8 to 10 kilometers. I remember shrinking into my seat, trying to hide, hoping he would not see me. I told my family. One of them was ready to confront him, but someone else said, "It is normal at this age." And just like that, it was dismissed. That sentence did something to me. Maybe I just had to tolerate it. But I knew this was not normal, and it did not stop. Not for weeks, not for months, for 2 to 3 years. Eventually we moved houses, and I stopped seeing him. But experiences like that do not leave you. Years later I saw a man at a wedding who resembled him from behind, similar build, similar presence. And I was shaken far more than I expected. Then, about a year ago, I saw him again, at an orchestra event. His mother had been invited as a guest. And there he was. After 8 or 9 years, everything came back. Not gradually, not gently, just like that. Fear, helplessness, dread. My hands turned cold, my feet went numb. My brother understood immediately. He stayed by my side the entire event and made sure I was never in that man's line of sight. But inside, I was 14 years old again. Since then, I have caught myself turning around repeatedly while walking, scanning crowds, checking if someone is following me, overanalyzing strangers who slightly resemble him, even in places far from where I used to live. And the scariest part is not knowing what is real and what is just my mind trying to protect me. Because what if it was him? And what if it was not? She is still living with it. The next person found out years later from a news broadcast just how close they had come. Story 6. That time I think I met a serial killer. Back in the early 2000s when I was in my late teens, I had a rocky relationship with my mother, and she would kick me out a lot, or I would storm out. So I spent a lot of time roaming the streets, often at night. One night I was walking up the hill toward home. It was around 2 in the morning, so the street was empty. A car drove up behind me, crawled beside me for a moment, then stopped a few steps ahead. As I walked past, the driver, a big guy with a round fat face and dark staring eyes, said something like, "Hey, I want to talk to you." It was not unusual for men to approach teenagers in those days. I was used to it. But for some reason I felt extremely on edge. Instead of telling him off like I normally would, I just power walked past and stared ahead like I had not seen or heard him. He put his foot down, sped past me, turned the car around, and pulled up next to me again. I backed up 2 steps and half ran across the road, looking at my house ahead. Then he sped past again, spun the car around even more aggressively this time, braked hard a few feet ahead of me, and opened his door to jump out. I panicked and sprinted back across the road, down a neighbor's driveway and down the side of my house. We had a side door in an alcove, and I squeezed into it, fumbling with my key in the dark. While I was doing that, I saw his car creep up and stop at the top of the driveway. He got out and walked a few steps down looking for me behind the hedges. Luckily, he could not see me in the dark. He got back in the car and drove off. I got inside, told my brother the weird story. We laughed about it the way teenagers do, and forgot all about it. A few years later, I saw his face all over the news. He had been convicted of multiple murders, kidnappings, and rapes of girls and women in our local area. And they were still pinning historic cases on him years later. I will never know for certain, but I am pretty sure it was him. Same round face, same dark staring eyes, same area, same time frame. Weirdly, it bothers me a lot more now that I am older than it did back then. Maybe because I have daughters of my own now. 6 real stories, 6 moments where something could have gone very, very differently. If any of these made you hold your breath, like this video, because it helps more people find these stories. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing content like this, and drop a comment below which story stayed with you the most. I read every single one.